We serve a faithful God, even when he does not have faithful people. Can I get a oh yeah? We are not here because we are the best. We are not here because we are perfect. We're not here because we are faithful, but we're here because we have such a faithful God. He is the place we turn. Whether in times of pandemic or in times of peace, we say, Father, we turn to you. And everybody at Wainema said, Amen. Well, that's the lesson for the evening. Thank you very much. Some are saying that's the preacher we've been looking for right there. I mean, all right, so I had somebody come up and say, oh, we've enjoyed your lessons, Brother Walling. And I always say, well, then you need to get out more and hear more preachers. And they said, but, you know, where do you preach regularly on a Sunday morning? And I had to confess that working for Pepperdine University, I am not any specific church every Sunday morning. In fact, it seems during a typical year that almost every Sunday morning I'm in a different church or conference speaking around the country, which is typically a blessing for me. But during this pandemic time, I did help and provide some lessons for congregations who either weren't able to live stream or do others, and so those are available on YouTube. If you're into YouTube and you go to, let's see, I think I got a pic of that back there, guys. Nope. Oh, sorry. Okay. We know not. We're in a reboot situation, maybe. Okay, all right. Well, just imagine there's a picture there of the Pepperdine Church Relations. Can everybody say Pepperdine Church Relations? YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and you put in Pepperdine Church Relations, you'll come to our channel, and there are about 18 lessons that I did during the COVID, one each week. So if you have a time when you're having a little trouble getting to sleep, just go to there, click on that. You can watch one of those sermons, and you'll be out in no time flat. Well, we're here tonight because it's time for the psalmist to sing us a story song. Do you need the jump drive back? Yes, okay, all right, we can do that. Here we go. Thank you. And let me in all truth say, Jesse and the team at the back table have been awesome. Can we give it up for our tech team? Tech team there. We started out with Psalm number 1, which begins with the word blessed. And he talked about the two foundations that you can choose. We moved from there to, help me out. Thank you, Psalm 37, where we learned to do David's two-step, right? Which was trust in the Lord and do good. We moved from there to Psalm 107, which talked about right, the 4 different places, and in each one of them we found, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures how long? Forever. God never stops loving you. And this morning we talked about Psalm 37 and the call to confess. Confess your mess. I hope those Psalms will maybe have a little new ring in your ears. But this one, I just guarantee, was not on anybody's list. When they say, oh, my goodness, I hope we'll have a lesson on, are you going to do the 23rd Psalm, brother? No, instead, we're going to do the 78th Psalm. Now, if you open up your Bible to the 78th Psalm, you'll find that it is a teaching psalm. It is actually a Bible history psalm. Now, the reason that we tell history is because we don't want to repeat its mistakes. And so tonight we're going to have a little bit of story time in our lesson this evening, because that's what this song is about. Some songs tell stories. Can you think of a story song? Johnny Cash used to sing about a boy named Sue, and there was a story in that song. When I was little, there was a TV show that had its own story song that went like this. Davy, Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier, right? And the song went ahead to tell the story of Davy Crockett. Well, if you took Psalm 78 and could hear it, you would hear this as a song, not about Davy Crockett, not about necessarily a hero, but about a time in the life, thank you, brothers, of Israel, in which they were walking through some history that some would want to forget. Now, I know that there are some here that are sharing in my age experience. You've been around a while. You're my wrinkled homies. You understand what it means to hear things like Gomer Pyle or Davy Crockett or Dennis the Menace. Those things you go, yes, I remember that. But remembering has also become a bit of a problem as we get older. Can I get a oh yeah on that? You find yourself saying, where's my glasses, honey? They're on your head. Oh, that's right. And where did I put the car keys, sweetie? You've got them in your hand. Have you ever forgotten something that frustrated you so much? I had an older brother who was at the church, and he was talking about how irritating it was to just be, at 89 years old and trying to keep his life together. And smart-mouthed deacon who was with us made the comment, well, Brother John, right now you ought to be thinking about the hereafter. And Brother John said, well, I'm always thinking about the hereafter. Every time I walk into a room, I say, what am I hereafter? I don't know. I know that part of the purpose of Psalm 78 is two words. Can everybody say, don't forget? Yeah, now do it like your grandma would when she was telling you to remember something. Waggle your finger at the person next to you, turn to him and say, now don't forget. Or like a buddy of mine says, he likes to say, don't forget to remember. Try that one. Don't forget to remember. That would probably be a good sum of Psalm 78. And the question is asked, excuse me, what is it you want us to remember? And the psalmist says, well, just draw up a rock around the campfire and let me sing you a song. My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable, a story. I will utter hidden things, things from old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. Okay, we know it's going to be a story about old things, about history. But then he says this strange line. We will not do what? Hide them from our descendants. Pause a minute. Why would you want to hide a family story from the kids? Yeah, because it's not the story of the time you won. It's not the story of your success. It's the story about, oh boy, remember when cousin so-and-so, or remember when, Sister Brown, and it's like, oh, Catherine and I were thankful to host her uncle at our house for a while, he and his aunt who had come out from Oklahoma. Now, her uncle and aunt are the oldest living members of Catherine's side of the family. And so they have become the repositories of history. If you want to find out, now where was Wilton living when? And when did Red start flying for Delta Airlines? And what about that time that Mama, who used to live in Stuttgart, Arkansas, ran that little second-hand store you'd call Don, her Uncle Don? Well, Uncle Don has decided, it seems, that there are some stories the family doesn't know about that they ought to. And we had the most interesting lunch one day when he said, Catherine, I don't know if you know about your great-great-uncle, Clarence, who lived such and such. And I'm thinking, this could be interesting. I'm eating, and all of a sudden it has to do with Clarence apparently leaving his wife for his niece. And the two of them taken up together, but she changed her name. I mean, it's one of these stories that by the time you're done, I'll skip dessert. I mean, it's just like, wow. Now, normally, we don't put those kind of stories in the Christmas letter. Do you understand what I'm saying? Nobody sends out a Christmas letter that's saying, well, Johnny's back in prison again, and Martha flunked algebra and I lost my job. You know, all our Christmas letters sound like we're all doing fantastic. Well, the writer here says there are times when the family needs to be reminded, so I'm going to sing you a song of a bad time. And we will not, everybody say, hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He's done. So it's definitely not a story in which God's the bad guy, but then who is it that He wants us to understand things went south? Things went sideways for them. Listen and see if you pick it up. He goes on from here and says, He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born. We've got a pregnant lady sitting back there. Even the children yet to be born. And they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God. Everybody read these words loud for me. And would not, oh come on, one more time. And would not His deeds, but would keep His commandments. He said, here's the purpose of story time, children. You need to remember the great deeds of God and the not so great deeds of men. Because if you don't remember the great deeds of God, you're going to be in trouble and you won't know where to turn. But if you don't remember the not so great deeds of men, you won't know how sneaky Satan is and how his goal is to make you forget the great deeds of God and make you stumble over the same rocks your great-great-great-great-grandpa fell over when it comes to sin and temptation. And with that, he launches into ancient history. He starts with Ephraim and tells the story of the Exodus. Now, we're going to have to do this real quick, so here we go. Once upon a time, God created the heavens and the earth. And in just a few days, He went from saying, "Let there be light," and there was light, to saying, "I will make man in my image." And on the seventh day, He rested. What a beautiful way for the story to begin. But before you get 4 chapters in, you've got Adam and Eve all of a sudden naked and hiding in the bushes because they have done what God said not to do. And we get on what I call the misery go-round. Every time God gives a decree, man says, okay. Then man says, well, maybe I know better. Then man tries knowing better. Then man ends up in a mess. Then man calls out to God, and God saves him, and then God gives him a decree. And then we just keep going round and round and round in the misery go-round. Well, this cycle of misery continues right through from God creating man, and 10 generations later, we have the world being so wicked that He calls a man to build a boat. His name is, and his wife's name is Mrs. Noah. That's right. Noah and Mrs. Noah have those 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and they've got wives, and they all end up on the boat, and the boat is buoyed up by water. Where'd the water come from? Rain came down and the flood came up, right? The water came because of a flood that God had sent on the earth because the earth was so wicked. And Noah gets off the ark and God says, listen, Noah, don't forget to remember what just happened. Now, I don't think Noah was in much danger of forgetting what just happened. The world got so wicked that everybody got killed. I just got to pull over and say this, and I don't want to offend anybody. How did we grow up telling that story over and over and over and over again and make it such a sweet, beautiful story that people bought little, Noah and the Ark pictures for the nursery? And somebody gave me, when my first child was born, a Noah and the Ark mobile. You know what I mean? One of those things that hangs over the crib and you wind it up and it ding, 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 plays a little song. And here's Noah, and here's the animals, and here's the boat. And it's all going around the little baby's crib. Folks, if we're going to do that right, you need a bunch of dead bodies floating in the mobile as it goes around because, oh, look, Mommy, all the dead people. Because the story is a horrific story. It is a story meant to shock us, not meant to be put in a little storybook for children. You realize how many Noah storybooks there are out there? And the animals came and they got on the ark. And look, here was a giraffe, Finn, and look here were the bunnies, and they all got on the ark, and then the ark sailed away. Excuse me, there's other pages missing. And the water began to rise, and a family began to drown. And then there was an old lady. She drowned too. And then there was another fellow. In fact, everybody drowned except for Noah and his family. Oh, what about the animals? They drowned too. Here's a dead bunny, and here's a horsey. And, I mean, it's just like, excuse me, wait a minute, this is awful. And the writer says, you're beginning to understand that we take our history and we sanitize it and we clean it up and we even want to hide from the descendants. Remember what he said? He said, I'm going to take a pledge. We will not hide. I am not going to skip over the stories that make us go, no. And he begins to tell a story. The story of the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt. Now, of course, the children of Israel want to exit from Egypt because they're slaves in Egypt. How did they end up being slaves in Egypt? Take your time. Because they were not as obedient as they should have been. And we can do this really fast. Abraham married a woman by the name of Sarah. They had a child named Isaac. Isaac and Rebekah had the first twins you read about in the Bible, Jacob and Esau. Jacob had 12 sons. You remember the 12 sons? And the 12 sons, of course, amongst them was a guy named Joseph. And Joseph becomes the Pharaoh's right-hand man. And Joseph, of course, becomes a person who saves Israel during this terrible time. I think I preached this a couple years ago when I was with you guys. It's a fantastic, beautiful, wonderful story of redemption. And everybody gets down there in Egypt, but then what we forget to tell is that while they were there in Egypt, they kind of settled in. They kind of thought of themselves as Egyptians. They kind of decided, well, okay, this is as good as it gets. And they end up in slavery. And a new Pharaoh comes on who doesn't know Joseph. And the people are crying out to God. And God says, okay. And so Amram and Jochebed have a little baby. And the little baby's name starts with an M. Ends with Oses. Anybody? Moses, well done. You know, hey, listen, it's Sunday night. I'm impressed with that. All right. And so Moses is called by God to let my people go, right? And so Moses leads the people out. Well, it's not quite that easy. There's 10 little plagues, right? There's another VBS story. I mean, death and destruction and blood and flies everywhere. And by the time the story is over, Pharaoh is saying, leave, I'm begging you, leave. And so they do. And as they walk out, they know God. We are Israelites. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, as Moses is going to tell the people to say, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And as they leave, they are full of faith. You talk about full of faith. Remember what happens when they leave? They get out there. The psalmist tells about it in Psalm 78. He says he split the waters. What was he talking about, splitting the waters? He's talking about when the people are leaving and Pharaoh decides, you know what, I'm going to go get him anyway. And he sends his army and oh no, and they come to the river. They come to the Red Sea. And they've got an army behind them, and God puts a fog there so the Pharaoh's army can't get through. And Moses places his staff in the water, and boom, the water goes back because of God's power. And when they do, they walk right through on dry land. Now, you tell me if that wouldn't be the only faith-based miracle you ever needed to see. Imagine after the sandcastle contest. If one of the brothers had simply walked out and said, Lord, I'd like to go to Japan. Can you make a way? And all of a sudden, the Pacific Ocean began to open. Do you think if you saw that for 1 minute, you would ever forget it? Don't you think you'd tell your children's children, and they'd pass down the line? I don't think there were many atheists who walked across the Red Sea. I don't think any of them said, you know, Jacob, do you really think there's a God? He said, I don't know. Hang on, let me catch this fish. I'm not really sure, because they were walking through walls of water. Or when they got out into the wilderness, and I love the way that the psalmist in Psalm 78 says, these people got out in the wilderness and they said, oh, we demand food, God. You got us out here and you're not even going to take care of us. No wonder they called them the children of Israel. How come you're not going to feed us? And so God says, all right, fine, I'll feed you. Remember how he fed them? What did they call it? The bread they got in the wilderness. Manna, which means what is that? Literally, the Hebrew means what is that? Because they didn't know. What is that? I don't know, but hand me a handful of it. It looks good. Manna was God's bread for his people. Do you think you'd ever have forgotten that moment? Do you remember? Oh, I remember. We didn't have any bread, thought we were going to die, and woke up the next morning and it was all over the ground. Just like frosted flakes everywhere. It was just there. Didn't even have to cook it. Just walk out, fall face down, and chew. I mean, it was amazing. Yeah, but what about meat? We want meat. So he had quail run into the camp. We hiked today, Catherine and I, and there were several signs. No hunting. Israelites would laugh who were there. God blew a wind in so that the quail flew right into the camp. I mean, they didn't hunt. Here's hunting. If you're an Israelite, hang on, baby, step back, open the tent door. There you go. Cook them. Because he literally drove them right into the camp. However, well, here, let me let Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 describe it, because I know he's channeling Psalm 78 when he does. And his language is a little more concise than the psalmist. I don't want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers, our ancestors, were all under the cloud. They all passed through the sea. They were all baptized with Moses in the cloud and in the sea, in that experience of going through the Red Sea. And they all ate the same spiritual food, the manna, drank the same spiritual drink, the water out of the rock. And nevertheless, go to that next slide. Nevertheless, God was not with most of them, and their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. The psalmist tells in paragraph after paragraph, the story of how God did these amazing miracles, and Israel basically said, nah. They forgot. They forgot to remember. Now, what Paul does, which I think is really helpful, is he kind of outlines how they got from in a wonderful position to a terrible position. Okay. The only way I can do this is just give you a moment that you won't like, all right? Whisper to the person next to you, I don't think we're going to like this. Go ahead and just tell them, I don't think we're going to like this. So let's just pretend that a couple years from now, the staff here at Wynema is so hard up to find a speaker that they call me again. And I'm saying, oh yeah, honey, we're going to go to Wynema again. It's been 3 years since we've been there. We're going to go back. And so we go to Wynema and we show up and I'm like, hey, there's so-and-so, so-and-so. But then I say, remember that family we met when we were there the COVID year and there was not, it was only a couple hundred of us there. And do you remember that family? Yeah. And so I go up to Jerry and I say, Jerry, remember that family that, oh yeah. Well, how come they're not here this year? Well, Jeff, they've left the church. But they've been coming to Wynema for you. I know. I don't know. They husband and wife kind of got crossways, and the kids were so upset, and the mom and dad ended up getting a divorce, and both of them just gave up on their faith. And the kids, when they saw that, they were so angry with God that, well, there's not a one of them that believe in God anymore, much less Jesus. You're kidding me. They had this lengthy legacy of faith. They had seen all these wonderful things. That's exactly what the psalmist says. If you forget, Jeff, let me tell you what will happen. And Paul describes it this way. He says, now these things occurred to them as examples to keep us, and he lists 4 kind of stages of this movement. And because I'm a visual guy and I don't want you to forget it, there's a Cass family, and I'm going to ask, not Mama Cass, but Daddy Cass, for just a second to come on down, if you would. Dad, what's your first name? Pardon me? Trapper? Trapper. What a unique first name. And because you're more than 6 feet from them, Trapper, I'm going to let you take your mask off just for a minute, because you're going to be the top step of a downward escalator. I'll tell it fast. First time my son and I, yeah, like, you know, an escalator. You've been on an escalator before, right? Those moving staircase things. I took my oldest boy. It's been years ago. I took my oldest boy to a mall one day when Catherine was doing something. I think it was maybe her birthday or something. And I said, hey, I'm going to take care of the kids. And she was going to get like a manicure, pedicure, everything was getting cured. And so she went to do that, and I had my son, who was about this old. And we went, and they'd put in a new 3-story escalator. I'd never seen an escalator that tall, and it was kind of freestanding. I don't even know how they did it. But down in the base part, the atrium of the mall, were all these little kiddie rides. You remember the ones you can go up and put a quarter in, and the horsey goes like this, right? Well, I thought, okay, I'll take him over there, because whenever we're there, he said, oh, Dad, can we do those? And I thought, we'll do those today. You know, I had a pocket full of quarters. Hey, this would be great, like Disneyland on the cheap. And so we got on the top, and then he said, oh, what is that? And I said, well, that's the escalator we're going to take down. And he looked and said, Dad, that's scary. I said, no, buddy, you're going to be fine. So we got on the escalator, and we rode it down. Oh, man, he was looking around. He thought that was the coolest ride. We got to the bottom, and he said, can we do that ride again? And I said, yeah, I got money. We can do it again. Come on, bud, here we go. So we rode the escalator back up. And Trevor, we got to the top, and then we rode it back down. He said, Dad, let's do it again. You know, he's not a smart kid. So we rode it back up, rode it back down. Finally, he looked at me and said, can I go by myself? And I said, get on with your bad self. Go for it. Do it. So he rode it up to the top, and then he rode it back down. Rode it up the top, rode it back down. But Trevor, I know, you've got a boy, right? I know you know that moment. My son had done this about 3 times by himself, and I was sitting watching, and he went to get on, and he looked back up the down escalator. Do you know what he was thinking? Mm-hmm. He was thinking what every boy and many girls think when they're. And that escalator has a supersonic, hypersonic, you can't hear it, built-in voice that whispers to children, bet you can't run up me. My boy looked up the down escalator and looked at me. I mean, I couldn't tell him yes, but his mom's not here, you know. And the mall wasn't very crowded, and I just kind of went, well. He took off. I was so proud of him. He was like a running back. He was taking 2 steps at a time, dude, flying up this escalator. And I'm like, yes, yes, there is a football scholarship in this boy's future. And then a lady came around the top with a stack of boxes this big in front of her. She worked for one of the shoe stores, must have, because there are all these shoe boxes, and she is literally running down the steps with the boxes in front of her, having no idea that my son is running up the steps. But at the moment she was about to come down, Taylor turned around and gave me, hey, one of these, and he didn't see her. So as she's coming down, he's running up. I'm like, no, and he's what? And I'm like, look. He turns, and by the time he sees her, and by the time she hears my voice, it is too late to stop the collision. I am down here on the bottom as a dad going, no, you know, and everything goes into like, it's like a dream, like you're being chased by zombies or something. It's like mashed potato. No. The woman was smart enough, and I'm always thankful. She was an older lady. She shifted those boxes, saw that kid. He's flying towards her, and she just stuck out her foot like that. Now, that may sound cruel, but if he'd have hit her in the legs and they'd have fallen down, both of them could have been killed. So instead, she just stuck out her tennis shoe like that. Well, Taylor slammed into the bottom of her foot. It knocked the wind out of his lungs. He dropped onto the escalator, like a guppy sucking air, and she starts looking. Where are his parents? Where is it? So I'm like, I don't know, no. I'm like, Taylor, and I started to run up the escalator myself, and she's like, really? I scooped up my boy as he got to the bottom. Breathe, buddy, breathe. Just relax, breathe. You're okay, breathe. And she just looked at me like, where's his mom? And walks away. Trevor, I want you to know that the psalmist wants us to recognize that there is a down escalator. Israel got on it, and that's how they ended up dead in the desert. That it's not like a lightning bolt that strikes. It's a series of steps. I'm going to get you to help them. They will never forget this. You ready? You're the top step. And the top step is very simple. It says, setting our hearts. Put up that text again, 1 Corinthians 10. He says, these things occurred as examples to keep us, everybody read the yellow, from. Now, I want you to look at them and really good and loud just say these three words. Thinking about it. Try that. Okay, now I want you to watch me and I'm going to cue you. You ready? Here we go. Wickedness does not begin with doing. It begins with. Paul says that when you get in your heart and you start. Now, you haven't done a thing. All you're doing is just. But that's where it begins. Very few of us take an action without first. And when it is a wicked action, it's called temptation. And we look and we say, oh, I can't do that. But you start. And after you have. Woo! All right. I got an English major up here. That's okay. You have taken the first step. Now remember, by the way, that's what the psalmist wants you to do. He says, remember how it happens. They started by forgetting God and thinking about rebellion. Pick your vice. You didn't just start one day. You didn't just start one day on alcohol abuse. You didn't just start one day on lying. You didn't just start one day on. No! There was a time when you were just thinking about it. And that's not wrong just to. No! Families, that's why movies, music, books, TV shows are so powerful. Because our kids start. And before you know it, they move on to the next step. Go to that next scripture if you would. Paul continues as he's reviewing Psalm 78. The scripture right before that. Everybody read the yellow. Do not be as some of them were. In Psalm 78, the psalmist says they forgot God. And when you forget God, let's see. What is Mama Cass's name? Linda. Linda, would you mind coming and being the next step for us here on this down escalator? Linda, I'm going to ask you to represent idolatry, which is a little weird. People say, idolatry? I mean, who does idolatry anymore, right? Well, you see, idolatry is when you take God down and put something else up. It is substituting something for God. God says don't do it, and I substitute, well, everybody's doing it. God says don't do it, and I substitute, well, my favorite music star does it. God says, no, that's wrong. And I say, well, that's odd because I've got friends at school that say that's cool. It's called idolatry. Or another phrase for it would be rationalizing it. Taking God's will down and making it okay. Can you say rationalizing it? Good. Now, we begin with, and then we move to. Now, what's the difference between and, you see, when I'm not really saying I'm necessarily going to do it, but I am. But then I think, what if I did? What if I did do it? Well, would it be so wrong? And I say, well, everybody does it. And all I'm doing is, I say, you know what? I mean, it's not that big a deal, really. Really, I know several people, and what I'm doing is I'm taking God's standard down, I'm putting another standard up. And I've just taken the second step down the escalator. Because Paul says the next thing that happened to the Israelites, well, the psalmist describes it. He says many of them were killed, but take a look at the text as Paul condenses it in 1 Corinthians 10. The next screen, if you would. We should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. Your son's first name? Ryan, I know you were so excited when I asked the family to, would everybody give Ryan a big round of applause here? Ryan, what grade are you in, bro? Ninth grade, fantastic. Would you stand right there by rationalizing it? Okay, good. And I'm going to ask you, yours is really easy, Ryan. Yours is doing it, okay? Can you face them and say doing it? Yeah, don't grin when you say doing it, Ryan. It's not that kind of doing it. Okay, all right. Can you stop grinning? Okay, probably not. All right, okay. That makes me a little nervous. All right, there, that's right. That's pretty good. Game face. Okay, face them, Ryan. Here we go. Now, I don't want you to forget that what we're talking about here is a progression that happens so slowly that we may not be aware of it, but it starts with forgetting God, and I start about doing something I shouldn't do, and then I begin, and then before you know it, I've come to the moment of doing it. Now, you need to understand that right here, step that way a little bit, Ryan, right here between rationalizing it and doing it, right in here is a big red line, at least I thought. I can do all this stuff so long as I don't step across that line. Is everybody tracking with me here? I can, but I just can't. Exactly. Ryan, I was 1 year younger. I was in 8th grade. And I was heading home, walking home from school. My middle school was just about 4 blocks from my house. And a buddy of mine named Randy Truxell, whose dad looked like the Marlboro Man. You know what I'm talking about? The guy with the big, the horse. I mean, he was like such a manly man. I always thought he could be a movie star. Well, Randy said, hey, you want to come by and get a Coke? And I'm like, yes, it's a hot day in Redlands, California. You bet. So we swung by his house, and, my parents were a little like, you can only have 1 soda a day, and Mom was trying to be healthy or something. And so we got there, and he popped, and both of us drank a Coke. He said, you want another? And I'm like, yeah, round 2, sure, And so I'm drinking my second Coke, and I'm feeling it. I mean, it's hitting me, and I'm like, this is so cool. And he says, my mom's got some cookies. Yes, cookies and Coke. Yes, this is the best after-school treat I've ever had. When all of a sudden, he's getting the cookies out, and we're eating and talking, and he looks at me and says, did you ever smoke a cigarette? I am an 8th grade pastor's son. The year is 1970-something, late 60s maybe. And he could have just as well have said to me, you ever done heroin? Because for me, smoking, my mom was the church smoke detector. She could smell smoke on a deacon 8 pews away, I'm telling you. And her dad had died of lung cancer, and she was like a smoke Nazi. She always, if I ever catch you smoking, she told me smoking would stunt my growth. You smoke a cigarette, it'll stunt your growth, she said. First time I ever saw a miniature poodle, I was like, I know what you've been doing, She told me that no girl would ever kiss a boy that smoked. That's like sucking on an ashtray. I mean, those are the kind of things I grew up with. And for her, smoking was defiling the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so when Randy Truxell looked at me and said, you ever smoked a cigarette? I'm like, no. He says, really? Come here. We head back to his dad's office. Oh, I remember dark wood paneling. It's like, oh man, this is a man cave. This is so cool. And he goes around behind his dad's desks and he pulls open a drawer. And in the drawer, he pulls out a box of unfiltered Marlboro cigarettes. I thought, he is the Marlboro man. Randy takes out a lighter, lights one of them up. And all of a sudden, and this smoke ring. I am stunned. And I start, yeah. I mean, you know, I've seen that Marlboro man on TV, you know. What would it be like? Smoke a cigarette. All of a sudden, it kind of felt cool. But then my mom's voice in my head, and I had to start, oh, yeah. Well, Randy's dead. Jerry, we got these out of Randy's dad's desk. Randy's dad's a member of the church. I think he was a deacon. So how bad can it, what am I doing? Loud? Absolutely, I'm rationalizing it. Randy took one more hit and said, I'd love to tell you that I said, I'm a Christian. But I didn't. You know what I did, don't you? Yeah. Don't smile. I took that unfiltered Marlboro cigarette from him, and for the first time in my life, I put it to my lips. And I blew as hard as I could. Smoke billowed out through the end of it, and I thought, that wasn't too bad. And Randy said, you got to suck it. I said, what? You got to suck it in. And I said, I know that. I was just cleaning it out after you used it, you know. Now I was stuck, right? I mean, I had to. And I'm here to tell you that as an 8th grader, I said a quick, I'm so sorry, God, and put that to my lips and went, and I realized I did not know what to do now. Because he'd made fun of me for blowing it out, you know. My throat started hurting. I didn't want to embarrass myself, so I swallowed. It was like somebody had poured hot lava down my esophagus, and when it hit my stomach, a small explosion. I began to cough. My eyes began to water. I think my nose was bleeding. I held out the cigarette to Randy. I think he took another drag, because when I looked up, he said, here, and I said, I'm full. He said, how was it? I said, it was great. I gotta go, man, thank you. I grabbed up my books and I got out of the house. My eyes are just watering. I'm sucking in fresh air. It's still burning in my throat. I am walking up like a drunk up Fern Avenue towards the pastorate, towards my house. And I'm walking and I'm thinking, well, everybody can tell. I could see cars going by and I know they were saying, nicotine fiend right there, look at him. But I had gone about 1 block when I went like that. And I smelled like smoke. Randy had blown the smoke right on me. I sucked it down my lungs. I smelled of it. And do you know who was waiting at my house? Who always was waiting at my house to see me? Because she was an at-home mom. And the first thing she would do every single day. Come here, give me a hug, give me a hug. How was your day? And I knew if my mom smelled smoke on me, I was going to meet Jesus that day. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Yeah. So I did the only thing I could. I took a right at Citrus and cut down to the Brookside Market. And I bought 4 packs of Certs because I'd heard that Certs has a minty mask that can cover any smell on your breath. I had enough money in my pocket for 4 packs. In 3 blocks, I ate 4 packages of Certs. I mean, I was chewing them. I was rubbing them. I stuck them in my ears. I mean, I thought, please, dear Lord, please. I walked up to my house thinking if I can hold my breath till I get in the bathroom, I'll change my clothes. I'll take a shower. I'll clean up. But, dude, you know that when I got in that house, hey, Mom, go to the bathroom. And it started to run down the hallway. She said, stop right there. I turned around and she said, where's my hug? Mama, I really got to go to the bathroom. She says, you get yourself over here and hug your mother. I was dead. I did the Baton Death March over to my mom. She wrapped her arms around me, stuck her head. I remember she had an apron on. It's funny how you remember stuff. She wrapped her arms around me, stuck her head right there, and then I heard this sound right in my ear. She shoved me back, and I started in. Mama, she said, just a minute. Reached down in her pocket of her apron and pulled out a Kleenex, blew her nose, and said, I am so stuffed up, I'm catching something. I can't smell a thing. Thank you, Jesus. Dude, she was so stuffed up, she could not have smelled me if I'd been made out of tobacco. I mean, I said, Mom, I'm going to the bathroom. Okay, I'm sorry, buddy, I've just got this cold. I ran down there. I changed my clothes. I stuffed them in the hamper. I took a shower. You ever seen lava soap? I soaped myself with lava soap. I took off 2 layers of skin just trying, praying, and guess what? She never found out. Best thing. No, it was not the best thing ever, because it set me on a path of thinking that if I just, and then, and if I'm careful when I, nobody will know. Give me a if you know how bad a lesson that is to begin to believe. The psalmist says, dude, you forgot. You forgot the faithfulness of God. You forgot that what you need to do is tell the truth. You forgot who you are. Now, I'm not telling you that smoking is a sin is going to send you to hell. But, dude, I promise you that when you start down this escalator of thinking about it and rationalizing it, and then you start doing it, there's yet another step coming. Because this is what the psalmist says. The psalmist says they turned their back on God, that they began to test God, to speak out against God. Here's how Paul kind of sums it up. We should not test the Lord as some of them did and were killed, and don't grumble as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. He says, don't you remember what the psalmist warned us about? He said, when you get here, you don't stop. Oh, you'll still come to Wainema when you're here. It's just nobody knows that you've been. Yeah. Ethan, come here a minute, bro. Thanks, man. Come, just hustle right on down here. And by the way, you're rocking the hat, man. You are rocking the hat. Come down here and stand just to the left of my brother right here. That's great. You guys scoot just a little bit that way so we can get this escalator look coming down here, all right? Ethan, you are the bottom of the escalator. Not only have you been, and you're now to the point where, can you take your hand and do this? Just like, don't talk to the hand, you know. Yeah. And if you'll say defending it. Yeah. You're going to have to say it super loud for Grandma in the back. Go for it. Yeah. Because here's what happens. You get to the place where you stop hiding it, where you stop trying to make sure nobody knows. And so somebody sees you at the bar or sees you with somebody you're not married to, and they go, dude, what are you doing? Hey, man, it's not your business. In fact, you might even say, don't throw your church rules on me. And this is the person that's not at Wynema. They're on Sunday morning. And when you reach out and say, man, what's going on? It's like, don't even. I am so over that. But wait a minute. You used to be, the psalmist says, Israel's story is this sad chorus of what you used to be. You used to be faithful. You used to be committed. You used to be, but he says you got on that escalator, and before you know it, you got to the bottom step. And the sad thing is, look out there and smile, everybody. You can't tell what step they're on. Because we can't read hearts. Your mom will tell you she can. She's lying. You can't read hearts. Only God can. Can I ask you a real personal question? Where are you? The psalmist says, don't forget who God is. Don't forget his wonderful deeds. Don't forget what he's done. And whether you're just thinking about it or rationalizing it, or whether you're doing it and nobody else knows, or maybe you've even got to the point where you're like, shut up, I don't care. The danger is you get down here and somebody says, oh, it's hopeless. Have you talked to so-and-so? There's no sense in talking to so-and-so. He is a hopeless case. There is no way things are going to change for him. He is at the bottom of that escalator, and he is at the bottom of the pit. So just mark him off. I love what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And then look at these beautiful words. And God is, he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But even when you're tempted, he'll provide a way out so that you can endure it. There's a way to get off the escalator. And it begins with remembering. Will you give these four folks a big round of applause? Thank you, guys. Thank you, Ethan. You guys, thanks. Now, I could stand up here and tell you, oh, believe this, it's true. But because of God's providence and him allowing me to have a conversation today with a gentleman named Doug Beeler, he said, why don't you just let people hear actually the story? Doug, come on up, and everybody else buckle your seatbelts, because for the next 5 minutes, as we close, I want you to hear an actual story of somebody who rode that escalator right to the bottom. Grab a seat, man. And when they got to the bottom, and people said, he's never coming back up, God helped him remember. Doug? And is there a handheld? Grab that one right there, bro. It will be.
How about now? Oh, thank you so much for this opportunity. Well, to get to this story, I need to preface it a little bit. I was adopted in 1963 by Ron and Muriel Beeler in Tillamook, Oregon. I had a little brother who was adopted as well, and I was given every opportunity to succeed at a very early age. I grew up on a dairy farm. We milked 400 cows. I had 800 acres to run on, and I grew up in the church. I used to have this little badge that had a little bar, 7 of them, for perfect attendance in Sunday school. So I was pretty well versed in the Bible, and I thought I had a pretty great life. I'd always known I was adopted, and I always felt chosen and special. Unfortunately, I had a different path for my life. I started out with a pretty promising athletic career in high school. I had a lot of colleges looking at me. Unfortunately, when I was in the 6th grade, I smoked a little bit of pot. This little escalator thing right here, that was me in the 6th grade. It didn't become a daily thing, but it became something that would progress, and it was so subtle and so unbeknownst to me that if you would have told me back then that 30 years from now you'd be sticking a needle in your arm, I'd have knocked you out. That was not going to be me. By no way, no means. I need to stand up and move if it's okay.
Yeah.
So I got into high school. I started skipping school. I started missing classes. I never pushed myself at anything. I would work at the dairy farm, and I would I lived the life of all 4 of these people up there in concession from yesterday's. And halfway through my senior year, the director of athletic director, Al Gertson, pulls me aside and he says, "Hey, Doug," he goes, "your attendance isn't good enough for you to graduate with your class. You're going to have to do night school." And I said, "Okay, no problem. Do I get to play sports?" He said, "No." And I made a split decision, and I dropped out of high school, went to work at the farm. I spent the next 30 years regretting that decision. My life was like a big, giant wave sneaking up behind me of all those regrets and all of that hurt and that shame and that guilt and all those inequities that my life had become, and I tried to outrun them. I travel all over the country, or the U.S., trying to escape from me. And every 10 years, I'd check into a treatment center. I would get out. I would live a good life, never admitting that I had a problem to drugs. My problem was always you people. It wasn't me. Another 10 years go by, another treatment center. Another 10 years, another treatment center. 2000, or let me back up just a little bit. In 1982, my little brother was paralyzed from the waist down in a drunk driving accident. And I went back to work on the farm, and then those 30 years flashed by me. 2006, I was sitting on the riverbank. I became a junkie. I was an IV drug user. Crystal meth had taken over my life, and I couldn't function without it. My dad could barely look me in the eye. I had no friends left. I had acquaintances. I had people I sold drugs to. I had people I bought drugs from, and that was it. I got word that my brother was he started to get meningitis from complications from surgery from when they put Lukey rods in his back years ago. They left a screw in there. It had created this big hole in his back, and the toxic anemia broke through his blood system, and he was being transported from Tillamook to Emmanuel Hospital, and then he wouldn't survive the trip. And I chose to sit on the riverbank and wait for my shipment of crystal meth come in from Portland, rather than go be with my brother and my family as my brother passed. And the reason I did that was because one of the reasons is because I couldn't function without it. The other reason was my brother found out that I became an IV drug user, and he didn't want anything to do with me. He called me all kinds of names, and so I just gave him a big bird and sat on the river. And a few days later, after meeting with the pastor of our church, Dean Christ, he convinced me to write a letter to my brother and read it to him in the funeral home, and I did. And I asked my brother to forgive me, told him that I loved him, along with a whole bunch of other things, that I stuck it in his pocket. And that's how I said goodbye to my little brother. Course of next year, I tried to commit suicide by overdose. I knew enough growing up in the church that if I took my own life, I wouldn't go to heaven. And I watched my mom and my dad, and I watched my brother's death, the toll it take on them. And I started to see my pain in their eyes. And I started to know that what they were experiencing was not just the pain of my brother's death, but it was what I had become and what I was doing. We were their pride and joy. They couldn't have kids. They adopted kids. We were chosen. I always felt special. And I started to realize that what I was doing was not, serving them and making them proud. And so from April 13th of 2006 to May 8th of 2007, I started to live I lived in the basement pretty much. And my saving grace during this time was my sister. I've had adopted families show up over the years. My sister Danielle was a Christian, and she sent me this CD by Casting Crowns. And on it was a song called Praise You in This Storm. And I started to sing that song. And I started to hold on to that song. And I started to cry out to God, take me, I'm done here. And I didn't mean for God to take away my addiction and take away my hurt and my pain. But that's what he did. On June 13th, I walked out of the basement at my parents' house. I hadn't used drugs in just a few hours, and I had no more, and I didn't want to use no more. And I called a friend in Narcotics Anonymous, and I said, pick me up. I want to go to a meeting. He picked me up. He was celebrating 2 years that day, and I got in, and I broke down just a bawling because I wanted the pain to go away. And I started one day at a time staying away from the drugs, and as Jeff was talking the other day, I started to trust in the Lord, and I started to do right. And I did it one moment at a time, 1 hour at a time, one day at a time. And I just recently celebrated 13 years clean and sober, and I owe it all to my Lord and Savior. I always get to these places where I don't know what to do in any instance, and I always think, what would Jesus do? Thank you so much.
Next time somebody says hopeless, the next time somebody says, man, they've gone too far. Next time somebody says, don't even invite them. I want you to remember Doug. I want you to remember the psalmist. And I want you to make a commitment. Don't forget to remember. We have a God who brings the dead back to life. We have a God who restores broken relationships. We have a God who brought a people through the middle of the sea, who fed them with bread from heaven and water from a rock. And we have a God who sent his Son so that we would never say, there's no hope and nobody loves me. Doug, thank you again.
Thank you.
God bless.
One important thing of God had this plan for me all along. My first year in recovery, I got involved in Celebrate Recovery. And I went to a big convention down in California. And all my tattoos I've gotten since I got clean and sober, which is usually not the case for drug addicts, right? I got this one about a year clean. It's those who are wise and put others on the right path to life will shine like stars forever. I believe it's in the book of Daniel.
Amen.
I'm not quite sure. And at the time, it was just a Bible verse that stood out to me at Celebrate Recovery. Well, in time, it became sponsoring people and helping people. And 4.5 years ago, I got hired at Tillamook Family Counseling Center as a peer support specialist and a recovery mentor. And now I get to help people on a bigger scale than I ever could imagine. God had a plan for me a long time ago. And man, I just thank him for this. I was
Amen.
nowhere.
Amen. Thank you, Doug. It may be that there's somebody here who, when this is over, wants to say, Doug, can we talk a minute? And I know Doug is very ready to do that. But I thought there's only one hymn. There's only one. This fellow was a drug abuser, user as well, a drunk. He was selfish. He was a slave trader. At one point when he was washed overboard, his crew hated him so much that rather than try and fish him out, they just shot him with a harpoon and pulled him back in. But when John Newton flopped onto that deck and his life had been saved, there was something in him that said, I've got to start looking up. He remembered what his parents had taught him when he was young. And it's because of that that one day John Newton wrote, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saves, stand up with me, a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Just turn to the person next to you and tell them, don't forget to remember. Go ahead and tell them. God bless you.